and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know about the news of the day. Now, over the weekend, the Sultanah Aminah Hospital in Johor Bahru caught fire once again. This is 4 years after a previous fire that broke out in its intensive care unit had claimed 6 lives. The incident also comes just as police are investigating Bu Sulin, the editor-in-chief of health news portal Code Blue, for her series of articles on the findings from an independent inquiry into the 2016 fire. Now, the Johor royal family has also weighed in on the matter. Sultan Ibrahim Iskandar has since offered to pay for the cost of repairs to the hospital, and the Johor Crown Prince, Tunku Ismail Sultan Ibrahim, he has accused Putrajaya of neglecting development in the state of Johor for years. Now, I wonder how this will go down with the Prime Minister and the Health Minister, both of whom are Johor MPs.
Yeah, Melissa, this story got complicated very quickly, and because the coincidence of both the investigation into the editor of Code Blue and a second fire breaking out in the hospital just as this was happening, as questions were raised as to why, or if in fact the report on which Bu Sulin had written those series of articles was in fact classified or not, and in fact why they should be classified. If there was a public inquest, surely these findings should be made public, so on and so forth. So wonderful way in which, you know, they now have a cauldron of issues swirling around this particular hospital.
So all eyes on this hospital and the management of this hospital, and also the kind of throwback to the inquiry of the 2016 fire. I'm so glad that you brought up you know, the inquiry, Sharaad, the report, because on what possible grounds could a report into the inquiry of a hospital fire merit the classification of an official secret? I really wonder about that. And also, what is the purpose of an independent inquiry if not to learn from the mistakes that happened and to prevent future tragedies? You know, there's no good reason why reports. This is not the first time we've spoken about, you know, these kind of independent inquiries or committees to look into reform. We spoke of the Election Reform Committee not too long ago, and there was other reports that have not come to light since, right?
Yeah, also it's very interesting. This issue really spans several administrations. We had a Warisan National Administration, a PH administration, and now a PN administration. And so the question of how those different administrations dealt with this issue, was there a significant difference during the Pakatan Harapan time in terms of openness to you know, having the public understand, in fact engaging with the media in order to kind of raise awareness about these issues. This current fire, of course, Melissa, we won't know exactly what the cause is and whether it could have been prevented if lessons from that first fire that we referred to were taken into consideration and things were put right at that point in time.
What we do know now is that the head of the investigating committee, the 7-member committee led by former Court of Appeal Judge Muhammad Hishamuddin Yunus, who is also the chairperson of Suhakam, he has also been called in for questioning. All right, in other news, we have the Home Ministry ordering the police to probe those linked to a book it claims to have insulted the Jata Negara, or the Malaysian coat of arms, on its cover. Now, the book, which is titled Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope in New Malaysia, is a collection of articles and essays about the 14th general election. And on the cover of the book, it features the face of a woman sitting on a baby, with a baby sitting on top of her head, and on either side of her face are 2 red tigers with human faces, and the tigers are both standing on the crocodile. I hope I described that accurately. Did I do justice to that?
Well, you know, it's a wonderful piece of artwork, and I remember that this whole controversy is about the artwork and the book cover, not the contents. Melissa, we had the editor of that collection, includes many well-known names like Clive Kessler, Lee Hock An and such, you know,
Tashni
Sukamaran came on that show. When we engaged with both Ken Wong and Tashni Sukamaran, we were talking about the contents of the book. We weren't talking about the book cover, which at that point wasn't very controversial, because we're now moved, you know, there was a different administration at that point. Of course, it was the Pakatan Harapan government. Now we have the Perikatan National Government. Though the people involved in this particular campaign to somehow demonize the book or cast the book as somehow are treacherous, as an insult to the country and its sovereignty. These individuals, of course, was the subject of that book. The book was about the fall of Warisan Nasional, the fall of UMNO.
So I'm wondering whether, you know, the outrage is about the content or it's about the cover, because as you mentioned about the, so the UMNO youth wing leader, Astro, he's calling for the book to be banned completely, not just remove the cover, change the cover, but to be banned completely, saying that, or claiming that the book is belittling the dignity of the coat of arms. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the legislation that provides for this, the Emblems and Names Act 1963. It is an offence to imitate the coat of arms under Section 3 of this Act, and Section 5 of this Act states that the offence is punishable by a fine of about 1,000 ringgit or so. But the question is, what is the intention of the law? You talked about artwork a little bit earlier, Sharaad. Should we be seeing this as artwork?
Well, you know, it's a complicated thing, because again, you go back to that, you know, part of the penal code that says that this is an offence, and why was, as you said, what was the intention? Was it to prevent people using the coat of arms to misrepresent themselves as something official and therefore getting some sort of
like
benefit from it?
Like in business on a product,
absolutely, you know, or a seal of something of that sort, as opposed to this, which is a kind of imaginative take on the coat of arms, suggesting different elements, and why you might say it's quite artistic. It's an attempt to think about this new Malaysia, because we have now passed from New Malaysia into a post-New Malaysia era, and not entirely sure if the culture of tolerance for openness and differences of view have actually ever taken root in this country.
Well, it's often couched under the terms of, you know, patriotism, isn't it, Sharaad? I mean, the idea is that the question of patriotism, that's been often invoked by politicians.
Yeah, and all kinds of politicians, including those with massive allegations of fraud against them. Now, you know, it kind of does remind one of the 18th century writer Samuel Johnson, who said, patriotism's the last refuge of the scoundrel. You know, it's patriotism, very emotive discourse, right? And so to invoke it, even all over a book cover, is about mobilizing feelings and people potentially to attack a target. Again, Ashraf Wajidi recently, you know, in his campaign against Eric Paulson on that
MCMC Consultative Committee, that's right.
Absolutely. He had a win there. Perhaps he'll get another win with this particular campaign.
We'll have to see. Keep an eye on this one. But in just a few minutes, we're going to be taking a closer look at the proposal to name Sabah Chief Minister Datuk Seri Shafie Apdal as the opposition's Prime Minister candidate. Stay tuned to consider this. Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Over the weekend, we've seen mixed responses to Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad's endorsement of Parti Warisan Sabah President Datuk Seri Shafie Apdal as the Pakatan Plus candidate for Prime Minister. Now, some have welcomed the proposal, saying it will focus much needed attention on East Malaysia. Critics, however, point out that Shafie's party, Warisan, commands only 9 seats in the Dewan Rakyat and claim that the move is simply to thwart Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim from becoming the Prime Minister. Now, over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be speaking to commentators for their insights. We have now Dr. Vilashini Somiah. She is with the Gender Studies program at Universiti Malaya. She joins us first. Vila, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, how did Sabahans respond to the proposal to nominate Shafie Apdal as PM designate? I mean, what have you observed so far?
Well, you know, it's certainly interesting times. As an anthropologist, I always like to have a feel of how people are reacting to this. And I have to say it's a bit of a mixed bag here. in a sense, there is some excitement, right? We're talking about potential representation from Sabah and the Greater Borneo, of course. We're also talking about these new possibilities of finally bringing in resources, much needed resources into the state. And of course, the elephant in the sovereign room, MA63, right, which really didn't get the vote of confidence in the last time when Pakatan Harapan was in charge. But at the same time, I would say by a slighter greater majority, there is this feeling of unease, I think, simply because the trust deficit for politicians is just, you know, it's what it is. It's a trust deficit. There's very little trust on the ground when you think about politicians, especially for Sabahans, the everyday Sabahan in Sabah, they'd say, well, you know, there's no real rootedness. There's no sense of rootedness. And of course, a term that is constantly used is the word kata, right? To frog. It means to jump from one political party to another. So I think in this sense, while, you know, there is this yearning, this some, you know, this low-key excitement that it could mean something new for the political narrative, there's still a lot of, you know, people are cynical about it.
Yeah, precisely on the question of cynicism, Vila, the issue of Dr. Mahathir himself, I mean, is as the person to make this announcement, a man associated with Project IC, rightly or wrongly, a man alleged to have changed the demographics of the state of, or the territory of Sabah in a way that has been seen by many as disadvantages to many groups. So how does that play out? Is Dr. Mahathir seen? What kind of narrative is he located in for the Sabahan?
Well, you know, that's of course a very interesting question, right? And the key word here, as you so rightfully pointed out, is alleged. When Pakatan Harapan fell, I think Warisan, led by Shafie Apdal, had made it very clear that they were in support of Mahathir. They made it very clear that Dr. Mahathir is the person that they, you know, sort of stick their guns with, and they move forward with it, really hoping that he would sort of return to the premiership in that sense. So for that reason, of course, many who are cynical about this move have accused Shafie Apdal of, you know, essentially being overly supportive of Mahathir in that sense, right? And if we go back a number of decades before Shafie Apdal led the now in control Warisan, he himself was, you know, a heavyweight in the UMNO Supreme Council. Also greatly influenced by this sort of Mahathirism that was, you know, a major cultural phenomenon within UMNO itself. And other concerns is that if he were to become prime minister at some point in our history, is that, you know, the big question is, will Shafie Apdal essentially be a puppet for not just Mahathir, but this greater idea of Mahathirism, right? So I think this, of course, goes without saying that there are these fears that the sort of shadow of Mahathirism still sort of looms over Warisan as a result of the connection with Shafie Apdal.
Vila, I want to ask you about kind of acknowledging our privilege here in West Malaysia. Now, how much of the conversation about, you know, who should lead the country has not taken into account Semenanjung privilege or Peninsula privilege?
Well, you know, first of all, I'm very appreciative that, you know, your question is framed around recognizing the privileges, these layers of privileges that many of us appreciate. And the truth is, I think what members of the Peninsula need to understand here is that it's a huge question of whether representation is rightfully so, right? Will Sabahans have a leader who will eventually become the Prime Minister of Malaysia, or could potentially be the Prime Minister of Malaysia, who will then now pay attention to the lack of privileges that people in both Sabah and Sarawak, the Bornean states of Malaysia, have essentially been suffering from, right? And this includes economic disprivilege, this includes political disprivilege, even social disprivilege. So essentially, having somebody there is currently seen as strategic and necessary for a federal political move, and not necessarily there to sort of empower Sabah.
Villa, one theory about the naming of Shafie Apdal is that it's there to sort of show up a Warisan as the state comes under increasing pressure. Once a state aligned to the federal government, now a state in opposition, something that Sabah has gone through many, many times over and over again, to its great disadvantage when the state is in opposition. Do you think that, you know, the ordinary Sabahan looks at the state government and thinks we can have a state government that's independent of federal, or that there in fact needs to be an alignment, and would be happy to see a shift in Sabah politics in favor of the current dispensation in Putrajaya?
Thanks for asking that, Sharaad. I think that's an important question to address. And I need to mention this. I say this as often as I can when I do speak publicly, which is that Sabah has been so important in contributing to the country's GDP, right? They've offered so much by way of resources, and so very little has come back to the state. And anybody who goes to Sabah, especially if you're not from the state, would very, very quickly realize that they don't have the kind of development and progress that Kuala Lumpur or other parts of the federal state enjoys. And for that reason, of course, you know, with the flooding and everything that's going on today, for many Sabahans, this conversation about Shafie Apdal being the candidate for the Prime Minister position for Pakatan Harapan is not as central as we think it is, right? Because these are bread and butter issues that they have to face. They've got to think about putting food on the table. They've got to think about dealing with the floods. They've got to think about, you know, how is it that we're going to move on with our day-to-day. Our everyday is essentially plagued by these issues. But we cannot forget that the potential for resources, the potential for improvement, and the potential for progress still depends very much on the federal government. And the federal government of Malaysia essentially helps decide to a large chunk how much can return to Sabah, how they can improve. So I think for this reason, there's always this you know, being caught between a rock and a hard place in regards to really dealing or sort of having this issue. But I need to say, essentially, having this come out in the conversation really changes the discourse, right? And I think this is very important. Right. If anything, it's a step forward, because changing that political discourse means the potential for empowerment and embetterment for many people in both Sabah and Sarawak.
Villa, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time tonight. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll continue our discussion about national politics in just a little minute. Stay tuned to Consider This. Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know about the news of the day. Now, over the weekend, the Sultanah Aminah Hospital in Johor Bahru caught fire once again. This is 4 years after a previous fire that broke out in its intensive care unit had claimed 6 lives. The incident also comes just as police are investigating Bu Sulin, the editor-in-chief of health news portal Code Blue, for her series of articles on the findings from an independent inquiry into the 2016 fire. Now, the Johor royal family has also weighed in on the matter. Sultan Ibrahim Iskandar has since offered to pay for the cost of repairs to the hospital, and the Johor Crown Prince, Tunku Ismail Sultan Ibrahim, he has accused Putrajaya of neglecting development in the state of Johor for years. Now, I wonder how this will go down with the Prime Minister and the Health Minister, both of whom are Johor MPs.
Yeah, Melissa, this story got complicated very quickly, and because the coincidence of both the investigation into the editor of Code Blue and a second fire breaking out in the hospital just as this was happening, as questions were raised as to why, or if in fact the report on which Busulan had written those series of articles was in fact classified or not, and in fact why they should be classified. If there was a public inquest, surely these findings should be made public, so on and so forth. So wonderful way in which, you know, they now have a cauldron of issues swirling around this particular hospital.
So all eyes on this hospital and the management of this hospital, and also the kind of throwback to the inquiry of the 2016 fire. I'm so glad that you brought up Thank you for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our conversation about the proposal to name Sabah Chief Minister Datuk Sri Shafie Apdal as the Federal Opposition's Prime Minister candidate. Joining us on the line, we have Hamidin, political analyst with Universiti Malaya. Hamidin, thank you for joining us tonight. Now, I'm wondering whether this proposal to name Shafie changes the potential number of MPs who might support the Pakatan Plus government, because at the end of the day, isn't it all a numbers game?
Thank you, Melisa. Thank you, Sharaad, for having me. I think by naming Shafie Apdal as a potential Prime Minister candidate, as what Pakatan call it as a third option, it shows that they are still struggling to get a clear number when the first two options were not really much on the table for the members of the Parliament. I think what they're having now is very much to give a choice within PH itself. It's not so much with the other member of Parliament, but within PH itself that they have alternative. If we already know that the first choice, Anwar Ibrahim, didn't gather so much momentum. The second option, so Mahathir as the Prime Minister again, didn't get through because PKR didn't want that to happen. And now, I think they try to find a midway by putting Shafie Apdal. Does that will carry out weight to other members of Parliament? I think we still wait and see. But I do believe if both big personality of Pakatan Harapan, particularly Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim, behind this proposal, I will not be surprised it will gain momentum soon.
Hamid, because the question of Shafie Apdal's loyalties seem directed essentially at Dr. Mahathir, and the package that this came in, there Shafie Apdal as Prime Minister, designate, because two DPMs, Anwar Ibrahim and Mukhris Mahathir, there seem to be of the three, two people who are proxies for Dr. Mahathir. I mean, could that be read? I mean, is Shafie Apdal his own man, or is he merely a stand-in with, what, 8 or 9 MPs that he has, actually a stand-in from Dr. Mahathir?
I think to some extent, yes, you can say that. It is a very much, I'm not saying a proxy, but it's a proposal put forward by Dr. Mahathir when they have an impasse, when his name was not disagreed by PKR. However, in my point of view, by putting Mukhris and Dr. Anwar Ibrahim there, at the same time, it's very much to settle down on the grassroots level, where not only because of Mahathir, but to look at Shafie from the East Malaysia, and there's another two, and I think Anwar Ibrahim still within that picture, and Mukhris Mahathir as the second Deputy Prime Minister. So indeed, in that sense, to show, in my point of view, to some extent, the influence that's being accepted by Pakatan Harapan, that Mahathir does have their own clout in gathering momentum among the members of Parliament. So this is where I think it's very interesting to see if the third options put forward by Mahathir is accepted by Pakatan Harapan, to what extent it will carry weight among the members of the Parliament.
Okay, you said that this proposal could be gaining some momentum. Hamidin, what is your understanding of the popularity of Shafie Apdal, both in Sabah and also in the rest of the country?
I think when it comes to this context, Melisa, I don't think it's the personality that matters, other than in terms of Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim. I think what's in the mind of Pakatan Harapan now is for them to have a candidate that can glue them together, and they see that Shafie Apdal can play that role. If you look in other leaders within the Pakatan Harapan, within the PKR, I don't think we have other than Anwar Ibrahim, or for Bersatu, Spirit of Bersatu for Mahathir, or Ahmad Sabu. So we have, like it or not, this is the best of the worst that can be offered by Pakatan Harapan when it comes to the Prime Minister candidate. But put it in this context, I think what they're having now is not so much the popularity of the candidate in the masses, but how can they pull members of the parliament, support of members of parliament to gain or to give them the votes to make sure that they can take over the government in the middle of parliament session.
Hamid, it's been said that without a GPS, that this game won't work. I mean, the Pakatan Harapan Plus needs GPS. Mahathir seemed to be a man potentially with some clout. He is a good friend of Taib Mahmud, the governor, of course, also a big player in Sarawak politics. But what else does Pakatan have to lure GPS away from Perikatan or from other configurations to them, to their side of the game, or of the aisle, as it were?
Yes, I think you are right, Sharaad. When we look at by naming Shafie Apdal as a candidate, I think it's very much to secure as highest number as they can from the East Malaysia, particularly in Sabah and Sarawak. Remember, these two states represent almost 60 parliamentary seats. And in my point of view, by having someone from East Malaysia, definitely will give a very much a good attraction, things on the table for them to give and talk and try to convince and negotiate, especially with GPS. Okay, and we know now even for the Perikatan Nasional, GPS play a big role in maintaining stability and the life of Perikatan Nasional. So I think by having Shafie Apdal as a candidate is give a very much attraction through that. Angle. But don't forget.
Yeah, James Massing from GPS has already sounded, you know, his cynicism. He's expressed his cynicism. So has Jeffrey Kittingan. They both see this as a ploy by Dr. Mahathir, essentially to thwart Anwar Ibrahim's rise. Do you think that they're in a sweet spot now? They're getting what they want from the Pakatan national government. Why would they change just because Shafie Apdal is in the mix?
That's what I said just now, Sharaad. I think definitely for both of them now, it's very much not only about their personality, but what can they offer to East Malaysia, to Sabah and Sarawak. And don't be surprised, I think they will offer a lot more compared to what has been offered by Perikatan Nasional. Definitely, there is many things that cannot members of parliament from Sabah and Sarawak to support any government. So I think for Sabah and Sarawak members of parliament, they know that they are in demand. Definitely, they will put a lot more demand to make sure that the interest of the state is well protected in any negotiation, including with Perikatan Nasional.
Hamidin, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and helping us think through this matter. We appreciate your time tonight. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.